We're beginning the end part of Magic Eyes Only, Earth's Encounters with Extraterrestrial Technology by Ryan S. Wood. SETI, Magic, and the CIA. Perhaps the one man who had been the major driving force behind the Green Banks Observatory's early SETI-based operations, including Frank Drake's Project Ozma, was Lloyd Berkner. When plans for Project Ozma were being formulated at Green Bank, Berkner told astrophysicist Otto Struve, the incoming director at Green Bank, do it for the sake of astronomy. In his book Top Secret Magic, Stanton T. Friedman describes Berkner thus: Dr. Lloyd Berkner had an outstanding background as a pilot, as a scientist involved in polar expeditions, and in Soviet radio communications problems. He had a very strong interest in space, was head of the International Geophysical Year program for the United States in 1958, and was the individual who announced to America that the Soviets had launched the first satellite in October 1957. Berkner became head of the Associated Universities at Brookhaven, New York, and served on many national committees. But that is not all. Berkner also served on the Robinson Panel, established by then CIA Director Walter Bedell Smith in early 1953 to evaluate the UFO controversy. The Robertson Panel was convened by the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence, and secret meetings were held at the Pentagon from 14 to 17 January 1953, during which a host of UFO data was presented for analysis. The panel concluded that there was no evidence of a direct threat to national security in the object cited, and that the absence of any hardware resulting from unexplained UFO sightings lends a will-o'-the-wisp nature to the Air Technical Intelligence Center problem. According to the panel, no UFO sighting or report indicated the presence of a genuine phenomenon or extraterrestrial origin. Not everyone, however, was convinced by the CIA's assertions. According to the late Major Donald Kehoe, he had been informed by an Air Force intelligence officer present at the meetings of the Robertson Panel that the agents passed by the best ones. The scientists saw just 15 cases, and the CIA men tried to pick holes in them. The agents made it seem as if the witnesses were dopes. I know those CIA agents were only following orders, but once or twice I nearly blew up. Similarly, Dr. David Saunders, who was on the University of Colorado Condon UFO Committee, is of the opinion that the Robertson Panel report represents nothing less than a carefully crafted cover story, conceived and executed for the dual purpose of confusing foreign intelligence and reassuring the cadre of our own establishment. There is ample precedent for the use of such double and triple layers of security in connection with really important projects. For example, the mere existence of the Manhattan Project was a secret, but the nature and importance of that project was an even bigger secret. Significantly, Stanton Friedman speculates that Berkner, also an alleged member of the first incarnation of the MJ-12 committee, may have been specifically assigned to the Robertson Panel to make sure that no one without a need to know was informed about crashed saucers and Majestic 12. Friedman notes that Berkner was also acquainted with both Vannevar Bush and Professor Donald Menzel, two more figures allied to the MJ-12 group. Menzel, a Harvard astronomer by profession, was also connected to the National Security Agency, whose interests in the activities of SETI will soon become apparent. Another advocate of the SETI-based system for detecting intelligent alien civilizations was Frederick C. Durant, an expert in missiles and rocketry, an associate member of the Robertson panel, and someone who was publicly highly skeptical of the possibility that some UFOs were extraterrestrial in origin. As Durant informed the author Tim Schwacross, I cannot accept that we are alone in the universe. We're undoubtedly alone in our particular configuration, but life of some sort I would expect at some time we may expect those visits. It's a long time before we can visit a stellar distance. It's a long time before we can visit at stellar distances. But I believe in SETI being the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Durant was careful to point out, however, I have no reason to change my views that any of these lights in the sky are not mistaken I have no reason to change my views that any of these lights in the sky are not mistaken identifications of known phenomena. It is only coincidence that two members of the CIA's Robertson panel were so dismissive of the UFO subject, but at the same time openly advocated support for SETI-based investigations into alien life. One recommendation of the Robertson panel was that individuals engaged in UFO research or allied to private UFO groups should be monitored because of their potentially great influence on mass thinking if widespread sightings should occur. The apparent irresponsibility and the possibility of such groups for subversive purposes should be kept in mind. With the startling revelation in hand, it is plausible to assume that the U.S. intelligence community has also kept a close watch on the activities of SETI and its key players in the event that ET really does come calling. Indeed, it is more than plausible, as we shall now see. Out there. In 1990, the publishing house of Simon & Schuster released a book titled Out There, written by Howard Blum, the best-selling author of Wanted, and I Pledge Allegiance, an award-winning former New York Times journalist whose work has twice been nominated for the Pulitzer Prize in investigative reporting. The book relates the story of a group hidden within the Defense Intelligence Agency that in the latter part of the 1980s attempted to resolve the issue of whether or not UFOs and extraterrestrial life were a reality. Of course, judging from the volumes of credible eyewitness testimony, physical data, Majic-originated documents, and more that has found its way into the hands of the UFO research community, it is all but certain that both of those questions were answered conclusively by 1947, if not earlier. Therefore, it seems unlikely that the DIA body dubbed the Ufo Working Group was in any way allied to the super-secret Majic control system. Blum himself does not shy away from the possibility that the Working Group was merely an unwitting front for far deeper and more sensitive UFO study projects. Of relevance here, however, are Blum's findings pertaining to the UFO Working Group, the National Security Agency, and SETI. According to Blum, the UFO Working Group was established in response to a series of puzzling UFO events, holding the secret U.S. Space Command Space Surveillance Center at Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado Springs in late 1986, but it was an off-the-record comment made by a National Security Agency intelligence officer that launched Blum on his own UFO quest. The officer told him, "You know there's been a lot of talk around the NSA about outer space, weird stuff. UFOs, we're catching a lot of crazy signals on our microphones, and they're not from this planet. That's a fact." Created in 1952 under President Harry Truman, the National Security Agency is beyond doubt the most powerful eavesdropping body on the planet. Situated on 1,000 acres at Fort George Meade, Maryland, the NSA has a huge budget. In 1985, it was reportedly $2 billion a year, and 2 decades ago employed some 50,000 personnel. Anyone who doubts the NSA's abilities in surveillance, signal intelligence gathering, and analysis and code breaking should read James Bamford's excellent expose, The Puzzle Palace. I gotta read that. Make a note. Read Puzzle Palace. I should make a little. The NSA's interest in the UFO subject is well known. Via the Freedom of Information Act, several hundred pages of UFO data have surfaced from the agency's vaults. In addition to this publicly acknowledged material, however persistent, rumors point to the NSA's long and deep-rooted involvement in the UFO controversy. For example, in 1990, Timothy Good was informed by an NSA linguist that the agency had a signal intelligence SIGINT group that was designed to monitor the activities of no less than 9 alien groups. Similarly, in the 1988 television program UFO Cover-Up Live, Majic investigator Jaime Sendera interviewed an alleged intelligence insider, the notorious Falcon of Moore Shandera Benowitz fame, who stated, "The National Security Agency has devised a system for communicating with aliens, which is some type of electronic or pulse sound system. The aliens send a signal to a certain location on Earth. I'm not sure where the receiving point is. I believe one is in Nevada, and the other one is California. Anyway, the sound or the communication is translated in the computer, and the aliens give the landing coordinates to use. So we know the location of known landings. Now what we investigate are the unknown landings, the ones where they're not telling the United States that they're landing." A report dated 22 July 1947 from the Counterintelligence Corps Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit regarding the New Mexico UFO crashes of 1947 states on its front cover, "This document has been reclassified as intelligence material affecting the national security and has been upgraded as above top secret with a need-to-know basis. Only those authorized personnel with Majic access may have access. Downgrading scheduled to commence only with an approved presidential executive order with approval of United States Majestic Intelligence and Security by authority of Lieutenant General John A. Stamford, Director of the NSA, National Security Agency." Similarly, Anthony Kimmery, the managing editor of Sources, the Security Intelligence News Service, has made the following revelation. "A journalist friend of mine who has written for such publications as the Washington Post, the National and The Nation and Regardes, and whose first book, An Inside Look at the Pentagon, was recently published, told me over dinner recently that he once asked his brother-in-law, a 15-year employee of the National Security Agency, what the hottest story in Washington is. His brother-in-law's cryptic response, 'There really is a Santa Claus.' Taken aback, my friend asked his brother-in-law, 'What do you mean?' 'Think about it,' his brother-in-law replied. 'What are you trying to tell me?' my friend asked. There are little green men from Mars running around?' 'You've got it,' his brother-in-law answered. My friend later asked me, 'Now you tell me, just how the hell do you go after that one?' What bearing, one may ask, does any of this have on the SETI program? Quite simply, according to Howard Blum, on one particular morning in spring 1987, as a member of the UFO Working Group took their seats for a meeting, they were presented with a paper, stamped secret, that had been prepared by the President's Office of Science and Technology. It began thus. Over the past 2 decades, there has developed an increasingly serious debate about the existence of extraterrestrial intelligent life. Scientists working for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration are convinced, 1, that intelligent extraterrestrial life exists, and 2, that NASA has developed the only rational way for detecting advanced intergalactic civilizations. The program, called SETI for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, will cost over $97 million and involves the use of a network of radio telescopes to detect signals from other worlds. It was this paper, Blum says, that convinced the head of the UFO Working Group, Colonel Harold Phillips, to launch its first field investigation. However, recognizing that the investigation would doubtless involve some knowledge of signal detection and analysis, Phillips recommended that operatives from the National Security Agency should be borrowed. Their purpose to determine if the USA could make contact with other worlds via the SETI network. 5 months later, the NSA team, consisting of personnel from the agency's Research and Engineering Division, prepared a report titled SETI. An evaluation contained within the report were sections titled Early SETI, the Logic of the Drake Equation, and SETI Searches to Date. But the most eye-opening entry related to something known as the SETI Protocol, drafted by Michael A.G. McLeod, Director of the State Department's Office of Advanced Technology. The protocol called for any confirmed contact with an extraterrestrial life form to be disseminated promptly, openly, and widely through scientific channels and public media. The NSA's response was that this was both foolish and dangerous, and they offered a number of arguments to back up their position. The first centered on the possibility that by alerting alien civilizations to our existence via radio signals, we were openly inviting invasion and conquest. The second was that the human race might end up as little more than a pet, a tool of experimentation, or worse still, a gourmet delicacy. The third on the NSA's list of scenarios was the possibility that an alien civilization would try to subvert our species and ultimately gain control over us. And the final concern centered on the prospect of widespread cultural shock on the part of the human race. Noting that all of this had clear military implications, the NSA team was unanimous in conclusion. We strongly urged that responsible governmental agencies immediately assume effective control of the SETI program, and who should be responsible for cracking the alien codes? None other than the NSA. Blum says a NASA spokesman assured him, "If we hear something today, you'll find out about it in the national news tomorrow." If the NSA's views prevail, the assurance will likely prove incorrect. The National Security Agency and SETI, 1990s revelations. Can Blum's claim that the NSA recommended the equivalent of military control over the SETI program be verified? There is no doubt that the NSA has been keenly aware of SETI's activities for decades. Moreover, Blum's data pertaining to UFOs, SETI, and the NSA can be verified in part via papers that the NSA released into the public domain under the terms of the Freedom of Information Act in the late 1990s. In 1965, an NSA cryptologist named Lambros D. Kalimos authored a 9-page paper titled Communication with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Interestingly, The substance of the report, which leaned heavily on the work of Frank Drake, was presented at a panel discussion of the same title during a conference on military electronics held in Washington, D.C. on 23 September 1965. Present at the meeting were Kalimahos himself, linguist Dr. Paul Garvin, dolphin specialist Dr. John C. Lilly, and astronomer Dr. Francis S. J. Hayden. The moderator of the meeting was Dr. Harold Wooster, the Director of Information Services of the U.S. Air Force Office of Scientific Research. During the discussion, Kalimahos declared, "We are not alone in the universe. A few years ago, this notion seemed far-fetched. Today, the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence is taken for granted by most scientists. Sir Bernard Lovell, one of the world's leading radio astronomers, has calculated that, even allowing for a margin of error of 5,000%, there must be in our own galaxy about 100 million stars, which have planets of the right chemistry, dimensions, and temperature to support organic evolution. If we consider that our own galaxy, the Milky Way, is but one of at least 1 billion other galaxies similar to ours in the observable universe, the number of stars that could support some form of life is, to reach a word, astronomical. As to advanced by miserable Earth standards forms of life, Dr. Frank D. Drake of the National Radio Astronomy Observatory at Green Bank, West Virginia, has stated that, pulling all our knowledge together, the number of civilizations which could have arisen by now is about 1 billion. The next question is, where is everybody? Kalimahos's comments then revealed that he, as a trained NSA cryptologist, was fully conversant with the scope of the investigations undertaken by Drake and his team. He continued, "The nearest neighbor to our solar system is Alpha Centauri, only 4.3 light-years away, but according to Dr. Sushu Huang of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, its planetary system is probably too young for the emergence of life. Two other heavenly friends, Epsilon Eridani and Tau Ceti, about 11 light-years away, are stronger contenders for harboring life. Nevertheless, if superior civilizations are abundant, the nearest would probably be at least 100 light-years away. Therefore, it would take 200 years for a reply to be forthcoming, a similar matter of 7 generations. This should, however, make little difference to us in view of the enormous potential gained from our contact with a superior civilization. Unless we're terribly conceited, a very unscientific demeanor, we must assume that others are far more advanced than we are. Even a 50-year gap would be tremendous. A 500-year gap staggers the imagination. And as for a 5,000-year gap, by the way, if they are as much as 50 years behind us, forget it. It is quite possible that others have satellite probes in space, retransmitting to them anything that sounds non-random to the probe. But they have probably called us several thousand years ago, and are waiting for an answer, or worse yet, they have given up, or more probably they have reached such impressive technological advances that they have destroyed themselves. Kalimahos further expanded upon Drake's work, but the final sentence of the following extract points to a potentially fatal flaw in the whole premises of detecting ET-based intelligence via radio and SETI methods. Epsilon Eridani and Tau Ceti were the targets on which Dr. Drake focused his attention in the spring on 1960 in Project OMSA, an attempt to detect possible intelligence signals from outer space. The frequency selected for listening was 1420.405,752, 1420.405,752 megacycles per second, or a wavelength of 21 centimeters. This particular frequency, postulated independently by two professors on the faculty of Cornell University, Giuseppe Cocconi and Philip Morrison, happens to be the radiation frequency of atomic or free hydrogen which permeates space in great clouds. Moreover, this frequency is within the range of Earth's frequencies able to pass through Earth's atmosphere. Presumably, the significance of this frequency will be known to other intelligent beings in the universe who understand radio theory. We're still talking about radio waves as the communication medium. Other possible media might be masers, lasers, or the as yet undiscovered and unnamed razors. A technology superior to ours might even have learned how to modulate a beam of neutrinos, weightless uncharged particles that physicists on Earth find it difficult to even detect. If so, they may have to await a century or two before we learn how to build a neutrino receiver. Kallimahos's final words in his 1965 paper may well have paved the way for an intensive monitoring and potential manipulation of the SETI program. And after we resolve our pressing scientific questions, it might be appropriate to make discrete inquiries as to how we could live in harmony and peace with our fellow man. That is, if we aren't eaten or otherwise ingested by the superior civilization that had the good fortune to contact us. But as far as the cryptologist is concerned, he and generations of his descendants who might experience the supreme thrill of their lives when we hear from them must keep a level head, not get excited, and be prepared to cope with problems the like of which he has never seen. Out of this world, so to speak. UFO hypotheses and survival questions. In 1968, Lambros Kallimahos wrote another paper that, perhaps more than any other, convinced national security agency that overt contact with an alien intelligence, whether in person or via SETI-style scenario, was a prospect that had unique national security implications. The paper was titled UFO Hypotheses and Survival Questions and began as follows. It is the purpose of this monograph to consider briefly some of the human survival implications suggested by the various principal hypotheses concerning the nature of the phenomena loosely categorized as UFO. UFO Hypotheses and Survival Questions focuses its attention for the most part on 5 central issues. A. All UFOs are hoaxes. B. All UFOs are hallucinations. C. All UFOs are natural phenomena. D. Some UFOs are secret Earth projects. And E. Some UFOs are related to extraterrestrial intelligence. With respect to point A, Kallimahos noted that the fact that UFO phenomenon has been witnessed all over the world from ancient times and by considerable numbers of reputable scientists in recent times indicates rather strongly that UFOs are not all hoaxes. On the matter of UFOs as hallucinations, he was equally dismissive. People, of course, do hallucinate. Although groups of people hallucinating is rare, it has been known to happen. Machines have their own form of hallucination. The radar, in particular, sees temperature inversions, but a considerable number of instances exist in which there are groups of people and a radar or radars seeing the same thing at the same time. Sometimes a person and a gun camera confirm each other's testimony. On occasion, physical evidence of a circumstantial nature was reported to have been found to support witnessed sightings. A continuing high percentage of reports of unusual aerial phenomenon are being reported by people in responsible positions in science, government, and industry. The sum of such evidence seems to argue strongly against all UFOs being hallucinations. The issue of whether or not UFOs are entirely natural phenomena is also dissected, with Kalimahos pointing out many UFOs have been reported by trained observers to behave like high-speed, high-performance, high-altitude rockets or aircraft. With respect to the secret weapon theory, the NSA cryptologist noted that the U.S. Air Force reentry vehicle and an often publicized Canadian saucer project leaves little doubt as to the validity of this hypothesis. Undoubtedly, all UFOs should be carefully scrutinized to ferret out such enemy or friendly projects. Otherwise, a nation faces the very strong possibility of being intimidated by a new secret doomsday weapon. It is, however, the section titled "Some UFOs are related to extraterrestrial intelligence" that may have prompted NSA officials with access to the U.S. intelligence community's most guarded UFO secrets to recommend that the SETI program should be placed under military control. Kalimahos wrote, "If they discover you, it is an old but hardly invalid rule of thumb. They are your technological superiors. Human history has shown us time and again the tragic result of a confrontation between a technologically superior civilization and a technologically inferior people. The inferior is usually subject to physical conquest. Often in the past, a technologically superior people are also processors of more viral or aggressive culture. In a confrontation between two peoples or of significantly different cultural levels, those having the inferior or less virile culture most often suffer tragic loss of identity and are usually absorbed by the other people. It is only coincidence that 2 decades after Kalimahos authored his crucially important paper, NSA officials were still expressing deep concern with respect to overt contact with extraterrestrial life. This author suspects not. We may never know if or to what extent Lambros Kalimahos ever had access to Majic data held by the National Security Agency. However, we can be certain of 2 things. 1. Kalimahos and, by definition, the NSA itself had taken keen notice of the activities of the SETI program practically since its inception. And 2. Kalimahos had warned of the potentially disastrous consequences that could result from alien contact. Warnings that were not only acted upon as late as the latter part of the 1980s, but that still may be enforced to this day, as we shall soon see. SETI and animal mutilations. One of the strangest events with a potential UFO SETI link occurred in the immediate vicinity of the Arecibo Observatory, Puerto Rico, and was reported by none other than Frank Drake himself. According to Drake, on one occasion early in his tenure as director, suggesting some point in the mid-1960s, a guard at the observatory claimed to have seen a sinister-looking man dressed in a black cloak walking the narrow trail around the perimeter of the bowl. The guard recalled Drake. The guard recalled Drake believed in the man to have been a vampire. Despite his skepticism, Drake courteously accepted the guard's report and agreed to look into it. But 2 days later, Drake says, "I really was forced to look into it because a cow was found dead on a nearby farm, with all the blood drained from its body. The vampire rumor had allegedly spread through the observatory staff, and now the cow incident whipped the fears of many people into a frenzy." In his book, Anyone Out There, co-authored with David Sobel, Drake makes light of this incident and the way in which the vampire was apparently hastily dispatched by increasing the use of garlic in the staff's food. It is an undeniable fact, however, that so-called animal mutilation incidents mainly involved livestock have been reported on numerous occasions throughout Puerto Rico and the mainland USA, as well as several other countries. The FBI, for example, has declassified a wealth of papers pertaining to this particularly grisly mystery that details similar incidents in New Mexico in the period of 1974 through 1980. Similarly, in 1999, British author and investigator Jonathan Downes traveled to Puerto Rico with a British Channel 4 television crew to make a prime documentary on the so-called chupacabra and documented numerous cases where cattle, sheep, and other animals had been found drained of blood in circumstances very similar to those reported by Frank Drake. The time frame of the incident reported by Drake is notable too, since it occurred only several years after the late Colonel Phillips J. Corzo reportedly read military intelligence reports pertaining to similar incidents of animal mutilation. According to Corzo, in the Pentagon from 1961 to 1963, I reviewed field reports from local and state police agencies about the discoveries of dead cattle whose carcasses looked as though they had been systematically mutilated. Local police reported that when veterinarians were called to the scene to examine the dead cattle left in the fields, they often found evidence not just that of the animal's blood had been drained, but that entire organs were removed with such surgical skill that it couldn't have been the work of predators or vandals. Corso added that after dismissing the possibility that this was the work of the Soviets, a conclusion was reached that it was the EBEs, or extraterrestrial biological entities, that's what EBE stands for, who were experimenting with organ harvesting, possibly for transplant into other species for processing into some sort of nutrient package, or even to create some sort of hybrid biological entity. A hybrid entity, perhaps not unlike the so-called chupacabra reported so frequently in the vicinity of the Arecibo Observatory. Mysterious mutilations and surgeries had been officially noted as far back as 1947, if not earlier. The Counterintelligence Corps/Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit Intelligence Assessment of 22nd of July 1947 regarding the New Mexico incidents of that summer states in Section 12. The most disturbing aspect of this investigation was there were other bodies found not far from LZ1 that looked as if they had been dissected as you would a frog. It is not known if Army field surgeons had performed exploratory surgeries on these bodies. Animal parts were reportedly discovered inside the craft at LZ2, but this cannot be confirmed. The team has reserved judgment on this issue. Aliens at Arecibo. Today, the Arecibo Observatory is part of the National Astronomy and Ionosphere Center and is operated by Cornell University through an agreement with the National Science Foundation. Approximately 5% of research time is currently allocated to SETI, including the ongoing Project Phoenix. This can't be the same Project Phoenix of Vietnam, could it? According to staff at the observatory, no classified work is undertaken from there. However, the observatory's educational officer, Dr. Jose Alonso, admits that they have had problems with radio emissions connected to U.S. naval exercises in the area. In response to questions from investigator Timothy Good concerning SETI and the multitude of UFO encounters reported in the vicinity of the observatory, Dr. Alonso stated, "As to aliens, it's a question of belief. People like to believe we're not alone, but we scientists have a way of doing things. Statistically, though, there has to be something. Data tells me they exist. There are between 200 and 400 billion stars in our galaxy, and 10% of them are of the same type as our sun. If they exist, it's only a matter of time and technology. I think we're going to be intercepting their communications with each other. They're not going to send us some message, and it could take years to understand those communications." They're not going to send us any messages. How are we going to see the communications? Whatever. Although Dr. Alonso does not subscribe to the idea that the U.S. government is withholding UFO data that could confirm the existence of extraterrestrials on our planet, UFO encounters in close proximity to the observatory continue at a truly dizzying rate. According to Puerto Rican researcher Jorge Martin, on one occasion in 1992, 3 triangular shaped objects were seen near the observatory, while on other occasions a large boomerang-shaped craft was seen hanging directly above the radio telescope, and a huge dazzling object was seen operating near one of the facility's 3 support towers. Surely some of this information must have filtered back to the staff at the observatory. Cosmic confusion. In the latter part of October 1998, a flurry of rumors spread across the internet to the effect that an extraordinary signal had been picked up that emanated from a star known as EQ Pegasi, and that might very well have been extraterrestrial in origin. Supposedly, the story originated with a man who claimed to work with a British telecommunications company. The internet message stated that the man, later identified as Paul Doerr, had mounted a 1450 MHz, 1450 MHz feed horn and a water hole filter onto a 10-meter satellite dish. Then, using 2 SETI software programs, FFTDSP and SETIFOX, he had scored a hit from the EQ Pegasi binary star system. NBC's online and cable service interviewed Dr. Seth Sostak of the SETI Institute, who stated that in September 1998 they too had received signals initially believed to have originated from EQ Pegasi, but that were later determined to be, in all probability, Earth-based interference. On 23 October, the engineer made a statement on a closed SETI news group concerning his findings, and in response, Dr. H. Paul Such of the SETI League stated that numerous attempts had been made to confirm the signal, but all failed. Was the entire matter nothing more than a hoax, according to Dr. Such? A responsible scientist, amateur or professional, takes ownership of his or her mistakes as well as accomplishments. It has the earmarks of possibly being just a prank. There is a curious afterword to this affair. On 3rd November 1998, Paul Dorr stated in a newsgroup posting that on 2nd November, after arriving home from work, he was met by 3 men. 2 were British, 1 from the Royal Air Force, and 1 from Government Communications Headquarters, the British equivalent of the National Security Agency. The 3rd man said Dorr was from the NSA itself. The inference was that Dorr had inadvertently picked up signals not from a distant star but from an American spy satellite. In this instance, the more important factor is not so much what the source of the signal was or was not, but the fact that here again we see evidence of NSA interest in and perhaps attempted suppression of data relating to unidentified signals and the SETI program. Meanwhile, over the course of the last 3 years, a plethora of data has surfaced concerning involvement in the UFO subject on the part of the super-secret Government Communications Headquarters, GCHQ, at Cheltenham, England. Robin Cole, a British investigator, has learned, for example, that GCHQ was deeply implicated in a UFO event in October 1996 when multiple aerial objects of unknown origin were tracked on radar of the east coast of England. Similarly, Cole has learned from staff at the base that UFOs have been tracked in Earth's atmosphere on regular occasions, and that GCHQ's in-house library holds an extensive number of UFO books and publications. That Cole appears to have hit on a raw nerve is proven by the fact that shortly after publishing his findings in the latter part of 1997, he was visited by 2 representatives of a British police intelligence department known as Special Branch and questioned about his interest in both GCHQ and the phenomena. To this day, despite questioning on this author's part, neither GCHQ nor Special Branch will comment on Cole's claims. Conclusions. Having examined the available evidence, let us try to arrive at some conclusions. There is no doubt that the premise and ultimate aims of the SETI program are laudable. However, the fact remains that apart from the so-called WOW signal, which may in fact have originated from a secret military space program and not in the depths of space, SETI has thus far singularly and spectacularly failed in its research for a message from an alien civilization. As we have also seen, many millions of taxpayer dollars as well as significant private funds have poured into the hands of SETI. Again, ET has not yet phoned. But perhaps more disconcerting of all is the way in which elements of the U.S. intelligence community, specifically the National Security Agency, have monitored, influenced, and perhaps even prevented the release of data from SETI-style operations for what may have been literally decades. On the other hand, however, diligent investigations undertaken by dedicated individuals and research teams have uncovered a wealth of UFO-based data in the form of eyewitness testimony. Officially released files from agencies such as the FBI, CIA, and the UK Ministry of Defence, along with volumes of surreptitiously leaked documents and other evidence that together give every indication that ET is already here. Anunnaki. It is truly ironic that if some of the huge resources channeled to SETI-based groups were made available to elements of the UFO research community, we might have in hand a relatively short period of time precisely the answers that SETI has been pursuing for decades. In the words of the X-Files, the truth really is out there. However, we may find it by vainly seeking messages from the stars, but by delving deep into the hidden world of the United States intelligence. I guess we'll do the afterword tomorrow. Yeah, it's kind of a beefy afterword. Shouldn't just gloss over it. So yes, we will probably be finishing this up tomorrow. Just going over what I'll be reading tomorrow. Appendix, I'm not sure if I want to read appendix. Definitely not reading that shit. No way. It might have some gravy, but I hate reading that old 1950s typewriter jargon. Until next time.